you've learned how to use some of these selection tools in Photoshop, we're going to work with how to use layers. So in Google Classroom, you will see the Photoshop topic, and underneath the first tutorial, you will see the second tutorial called Layer Basics. When we click on that and view the instructions, you're going to see what the file is going to look like. So if I click on the 04 end file, this is kind of what we're going to be creating, something similar to this. In order to do that, I need to download some files. So I'm going to download the 04 start file. So when I click on this, I have to go up to the three dots, open a new tab, and click on the download button. Once I do this, I want to go to my documents, and last tutorial we created a folder called Photoshop Tutorials, and I'm going to save that into that file. Then I'm going to go back to Google Classroom. I'm going to do the same thing with the beach file and the flower 2 file. When I go to my downloads, I want to open the 04 start.psd file. So if I just click on that, it should automatically open in Photoshop because it has .psd on the end. So the file format is a Photoshop document. You're going to see that there's an image of a pineapple, but there's actually additional images within this file. We just can't see them right now. So you're going to go to Window, Layers, if your Layers panel isn't already visible. Mine is. I can pull this over here if I want to get a better view of it. And notice that there are a bunch of layers in here, and I can drag this down so I can see all of my layers. There's actually a layer that has a postage stamp on it, but it's hidden right now. So if I click in this little spot right here, I'll click on the eyeball and make it visible. There's also text or an image that looks like text that spells out the word Hawaii, and then there's also a flower layer. So there's multiple layers within this document. I'm also going to add another file or another layer into this document. So I'm doing what's called compositing. I'm bringing in other layers into the document. The easiest way to do that is to go to File, Place. We'll talk about what embedded and linked are later, but we want to do Place Embedded for now. So I'm going to do Place Embedded. If it doesn't automatically open up into that Photoshop tutorial folder, go to Documents, find your Photoshop tutorials, and then open the beach image. So once I click on that beach file, I'm going to click on Place. It's going to put that into my document. I can hit Done or click the check mark that was up at the top there. So now you'll notice that it created a new layer when I brought that other file into this one, but it's on top of everything. I want to put it behind the postage layer, behind the Hawaii layer, and behind the flower layer, but in front of the pineapple layer. So in order to do that, I can click and drag this layer, and notice if I put it beneath the postage layer, then it goes behind it. If I click and drag again, I'm pulling that underneath the Hawaii layer, and if I click and drag again, I'm going to pull it underneath that flower layer. So this is the order that I would like to put these in. That beach image is very large though, so what I want to do is I want to transform that layer. I'm going to scale it down, and I'm also going to rotate it. I have to be on that layer, so I have to have that layer selected in order to manipulate that layer. So if I do that and I take my move tool, notice I'm only manipulating this layer. If you happen to grab on to a different layer, and it's moving around, you might have auto select on. So come up here to the top and make sure that auto select is turned off. You can turn this on later if you like this function, but for now we want to turn that off. What that will do is then that will force me to click on the layer that I want to edit. So if I want to edit the flower, I have to have the flower layer selected. If I want to edit the postage layer, I have to have the postage layer selected. So you can kind of play around with that a little bit if you'd like, choosing the different layers and then using your move tool to move them around. I want to manipulate or adjust or edit my beach layer. So I have to be on the beach layer, have that selected, and then I'm going to go up to Edit, Transform. Notice I can transform this image in a lot of different ways. I can scale it, I can rotate it, skew it, distort it, change the perspective or warp it. I can rotate it and flip it as well. For now, I'm just going to change the scale of it. So I'm going to grab the corner of it. You may need to hold Shift so that you don't change the proportion of it. I don't want to stretch it or squash it. So you may need to hold Shift. We're just going to make it, about this size. Then I'm also, while I'm on that layer, I'm going to go to Edit, Transform, and Rotate. Now I can rotate that any direction I want, but we're just going to rotate it to the right just a little bit. And then we're going to kind of move it up so it's in the middle of the image. I still want to be able to see the pineapple a little bit, so just kind of adjust it until you get it to how you want it. Once I've edited or transformed that image, I can either click the checkbox up here or I can click on Done to apply that transformation that I made. What I'm also going to do is I can not only add images, but I can also create some imagery within Photoshop as well. So I'm going to create a new layer. I can do this a couple of ways. I can come up here and choose New Layer, or I can come up to Layer, New Layer, or I can click on this plus sign right here. You can see that that layer is blank. That checkerboard pattern means that that is transparent. You can kind of see that with the flower, that we're only seeing the flower. We're not seeing any color or imagery on the outside of it. So I'm going to take that blank layer and I'm going to create some clouds. So Photoshop can create, you can use Photoshop to create things like clouds or flames or rain. We're going to use clouds at the moment. So I'm going to come down here into my tool panel and you're going to see that there are these two boxes of color. The one on top is our foreground color and the one on the bottom is our background color. I want to make sure that these are blue and white. It doesn't really matter which one is which, but to change them, I just double click on it. I can grab the hue slider and I want that blue to be similar to like what the sky would look like on a nice sunny day. I can come in here and I can click and drag around until I get a blue that I like. If you don't have the other color as white, double click on it and you're going to drag that slider all the way up to the top left corner of this little color picker here. So we just want to make sure that we have blue and white. I'm going to use a filter to create clouds. So I'm going to go to Filter, Render, and notice I can render clouds and lens flares and flames, but I want to do clouds. When I do that, it's creating some clouds, but notice it covers up the photo and the pineapple. So I'm going to click and drag that so it's behind the pineapple. I can also name that layer or rename layers. So right now, by default, it made it layer 1. If I click on the words twice, it has to be on the words, not on the picture or not in this space here, then you'll see that that text gets highlighted, and now I can name that clouds. So that's really helpful in organizing your layers, because as you can see, we start to create a lot of layers and we want to be able to organize them pretty easily. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to change the opacity of a layer. So opacity means how transparent or how see-through an image is. If it's opaque, it means we cannot see through it. If it's transparent, it means we can see through it. So click on the postage layer, and then you'll notice up here in your layers panel that there is an opacity section right here. I can click on this little drop down and notice I get a slider. So watch what happens if I bring the opacity down really low, maybe to like 10 or 12%. That postage layer gets very, very see-through. I want to change this so it's at about 40 or 50%. Doesn't have to be exact, but we do want it to be a little bit see-through or a little bit transparent. What I'm going to do now is I am going to bring in another image. So we brought in the beach layer by going up to File, Place. Another way that I can bring in another file is by dragging it into Photoshop. So if I come down to my Finder, and if you're not already in your Photoshop tutorial folder, click on Documents and then find your Photoshop tutorial folder and find the Flower 2 file. Instead of placing this, I'm going to drag it in here. When I let go, now I've put that into my file, and then notice that it made a new layer. I'm going to use my Move tool. I'm going to move this down into the corner, but I want to make sure that my Hawaii layer is above that flower. So I'm just going to rearrange that layer. So that's another way that you can bring imagery into Photoshop, is by dragging it in or going to File, Place. Now we're going to add some text. There is a text tool in Photoshop. If I click on it, notice over here on the right, if your property panel is open, you can see different ways that I can make adjustment. Well, you can't see them yet. I have to type. I apologize. Up here at the top of my options panel, you'll see where I can change my font, my style of my font, the size of the font, the color of the font, that sort of thing. So what I want to do is I want to click once underneath the word Hawaii. Just going to click once, and it's going to place what's called lorem ipsum text. This is just placeholder text. Also notice that it created a new layer, but the layer looks a little bit different from the other ones. Instead of showing a thumbnail of the image, it's showing a T, which indicates that that is a text layer. In order to select my text, I can use my cursor just like I would in Microsoft Word or Google Docs. I can click and drag to select that text. What I want to do is I want to type Island Paradise, but I want to do this in all capital letters. So I can press the caps lock button on my keyboard and type in Island space Paradise. And then turn my caps lock off. Now I want to change the font size. So I'm going to select that text, and I can either change it here, or now notice my properties panel now has information about my text, or I can come up here to the options bar. I can also go to Window, Character, and open up the character panel as well. So I have lots of different places where I can change the text in here. So what I want to do is I want to change the font to Birch Standard. So I can either click here, or I can come up here and click on this drop down menu, or I can come over here and click on this drop down menu. Scroll down, they're in alphabetical order. You probably don't have quite as many fonts as I do. And we want to find Birch Standard. So it should be BIRCH. If you don't have Birch Standard on your computer, just choose a font that looks similar. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. So we're going to choose Birch Standard. We also want to change the font size. If I come over to my Properties panel, I'm going to do that right here, or I can do that right here, or I can do that right here, or I can do that right here. We're going to change this to 36 points. So I can either type it in, so I can highlight it and I can type it in, or I can click the drop down menu and there are some standard font sizes in here. So I'm going to change this to 36 points. And then what I want to also do is I want to change what we call the tracking. We'll learn this, what this is a little bit more later when we talk about typography, but we want to change this. Yours is probably on 0 and probably looks something like this. We want to change this to 250. So again, we can either do this with the drop down, but notice it only goes to 200. So I'm going to have to type this number in and put 250 and then hit return. I also want to change the color of this font. So again, you can see the color option here, or here, or here, or here. When I click on this, I want a green value, just something bright and tropical looking, but easy to read. We want to make sure that we can read that text. Hit OK. Then we want to take our Move tool and just make sure it is underneath the Hawaii layer. We want to try to make sure it's centered on it and that it's not going over Hawaii or underneath Hawaii. We just want to kind of put it right here into this space. That looks pretty good. Notice also our layer changed, the name changed automatically with whatever we typed on that layer. And it only does that with your text layers. All right, now we're going to learn how to apply a gradient. So a gradient is when you have one color go to another color gradually. We want to adjust the Hawaii layer, but we have to select it first. It's not actually text, it's an image. That's why we see an image thumbnail or a layer thumbnail instead of the type thumbnail. So I want to be on the Hawaii layer, and we know all about our selection tools now. So we have to determine what selection tool we think would work best. In this case, an elliptical or a rectangular marquee tool would probably not work very well because we don't have just a circle or a square to select. We could try the lasso tool, but that would take a long time to do. But what we could do is use one of these tools that selects things by color. I'm going to use the magic wand tool because all of this is white. I want to make sure that I do the add to selection, and if I click on the H, then the A, the W, the A, the I, and the I, it selects all of it. So now we have all of that selected. I'm going to apply a gradient to this. So I'm going to click on the gradient tool. It might be hidden under your paint bucket tool. So remember, if you hold and click your mouse down, then there are hidden tools under here. So I'm going to click on the gradient tool. Up here at the top, you'll notice that I have some different options for different types of gradients. I have a linear gradient, a radial gradient, an angle gradient, a reflected gradient, and a diamond gradient. You can experiment with these if you would like, but we're going to do a radial or a linear gradient. We want it to go in a line. So up here is where I can choose a gradient preset, and there are all sorts of presets in here, so gradients that are already in here. I want to go down to the oranges, and I want to pick one of these gradients that goes from like yellow to red, or kind of a yellow to an orange, something that just looks fun and tropical. So when I click on that, it should apply the gradient. If it does not, then what I might need to do is click and drag to apply it. If it creates a gradient slider here for you already, then what you might need to do is rotate it or click and drag to apply it, or you might even need to make it shorter so that it applies the gradient within that selection that we created. But with that gradient tool, we can click and drag to change the direction of that gradient. If we want to customize the gradient a little bit, I can double click on this little picker right here, and then I could change the color of it by dragging this slider down and then deciding what color I want for that particular picker. But again, we're going to stick kind of with, well, you can pick whatever color you want. Just make sure it looks kind of fun and tropical. Okay. If I want to change this color, I can double click on it and I can change the color of this gradient. So again, make sure it's visible, it's easy to see, looks kind of tropical. And then again, if I want it to go in a different direction, I can click and drag to have that go in a different direction. So gradients can be pretty fun. All right, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a layer style. So I want to add a drop shadow to the back of Hawaii. To do a drop shadow, instead of selecting or clicking on the text or on the picture, I want to double click, or I want to do this on the Hawaii layer. I want to double click on the layer. When I do that, it brings up layer styles. There's a bunch of different styles in here, and you can kind of play around with these if you'd like, but we're going to go down here to drop shadow. Click on the word, not just the box, because if I click on the word, then I get options for that drop shadow. Notice I can change the color of the drop shadow, so I can change the color of it. And you can kind of see how that changes in here, although we're just going to use a black one, which is usually the default. I can change the opacity of that drop shadow on how like intense I want it to be or see-through I want it to be. I can also change the direction of the drop shadow. So notice if I drag this little circle here, I can change what direction that drop shadow is in, and I can also change the distance of that drop shadow as well. So you're just going to create a drop shadow on there however you would like, and then hit OK. The next thing that we are going to do is create an adjustment layer. So notice that the two flowers on the image are different colors. One is kind of a bright pink and the other one is kind of a purple. I want to change the purple flower, so this one here, I want to change the purple flower and make it look a little bit more pink. In order to do that, I'm going to create what's called an adjustment layer. So I can either click on here, or I can click up here and do, oh, it's in here. Looking for adjustment layer. Maybe I can't do it here anymore. If I can't do it there, I can go up here to layer and I can create a new Oh, that's changed. I apologize. So we will click down here and we're going to create a new adjustment layer. That must be an update to the software. There's lots of adjustments that we can make, and we'll learn how to use these later, but we're going to do a hue and saturation adjustment layer. Notice it creates a new layer above the layer that we had selected. Then over here, you can see the properties. So what I can do is I can adjust the hue of it by moving this slider around. But notice it's adjusting all of the layers that are underneath it. I don't want to adjust all the layers underneath it. I only want to adjust the single layer. So in order to do that, I need to create a clipping mask. So I can do that a couple of different ways. I can right click on that adjustment layer and I can do create clipping mask. Or I can hold Option on my keyboard, and if I bring my cursor to right between these two layers, notice how my cursor changes just a little bit. And then if I click, notice it makes this little arrow, which means it's only going to affect the layer underneath it, not all of the other layers that are down here. So instead of affecting all the layers, now when I change the slider in my hue and saturation adjustment layer, I can adjust just that individual layer. So I want to drag this so I get a little bit more of a pink color. I can also adjust the saturation so that color can be a little bit more intense. I can also adjust the lightness or the darkness of that image. And I want to try to get the flowers to look similar. You might not be able to make them look exactly the same, but I want to make them a little bit more similar. Now, if I were to turn this adjustment layer off, because it's an adjustment layer, it's not a permanent change to that image. I can turn it on and off, and I can edit it whenever I want as long as I select that layer. Let's see, I think that is all that we are doing in this image. The last thing that I want to talk to you guys about is flattening the image. So notice we have all of these layers. There are a lot, that's a lot of information for the computer to remember and for that file to be really big. If I look down here, notice the file size on the right says 31 megabytes. The size on the left is telling me how big the document will be if I were to flatten all of these layers. So if I flatten these layers, what it's going to do is make the file size smaller. The downfall of that, though, is then I can no longer edit those images. There really isn't any good reason anymore to flatten images, but to flatten it, I can come up here to my layers panel, and then I can go to flatten image. So what's going to happen is now they've all flattened down, and now the file size is much smaller. But now notice I can't go in and make adjustments to the individual layers. So I would not suggest flattening this. So I'm going to undo that so that I get all of my layers. If I really want to give someone a smaller file size, what I would do instead is I would go to File, Export, Export As, and I can choose this to be a JPEG or a PNG file. But I'm going to have you guys save this as a PSD, so we're going to just keep this as a PSD so we can see that right up here. So we're just going to go to File, Save. Then you're going to turn that PSD file into Google Classroom, so then when I open it, I can see all of your layers.